Operation Iron 2. Coming soon.
Perhaps one of the most popular categories of food supplements available today are the so-called fat-burning supplements. A lot of people ask me how effective these so-called fat burners are, and my usual response is that they're more or less adjunctive aids to dieting and exercise. In other words, what I mean by that is simply taking, a couple of these fat-burning capsules without use of a proper diet and exercise program will do literally nothing. Most of the current so-called fat-burning supplements are the basis. The main ingredient is usually caffeine, which is involved in actual fat mobilization, or let's say the increase of release of fat from that is stored in fat cells. That's fat mobilizing. A lot of the other ingredients, green tea has a minor thermogenic effect. But the basic question is, do the current fat burners actually stimulate fat loss? And again, my answer is they'll have a slight effect if used in conjunction with a good exercise routine, especially one that includes aerobic exercise and weight training. But alone, they're not that great. Let me put it that way. However, a couple of years ago, in fact, it goes back to, let's say, the 90s. There was a combination, a supplemental combination that really was super effective at fat loss. I used it myself. It was very popular among bodybuilders. And what I'm talking about is the ephedrine caffeine aspirin combination. Let's talk a little bit about the main component, which is ephedrine. Ephedrine was derived from an herb called mawwong, which was used in China for thousands of years. The ephedrine itself was isolated from mawwong by Japanese chemists in 1885, and it was around the 1920s that scientists became aware of some of the physiological effects of ephedrine, in particular in relation to bronchodilation, or dilating the bronchial tubes. This suggested that synthetic ephedrine, could be a useful drug to treat asthma, which is characterized by a constriction of the bronchial tubes, which limits breathing. And so the first asthma drugs were actually ephedrine. How does it do this? It does this because chemically, ephedrine is classified as a sympathomimetic. What that means is, it's a fancy term which means that it's structurally and similar to, and it works similar to the catecholamine chemicals epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are sympathetic hormones. In other words, they're the main hormones of the sympathetic nervous system, and among their attributes are epinephrine is capable of causing an immediate dilation of bronchial tubes. In other words, if you were having a severe asthma attack and you went to an emergency room, I know this because I have asthma and I've undergone this treatment many times. The first thing the doctors in the ER are going to do is give you a shot of epinephrine to dilate your lungs. It works within seconds. And of course, ephedrine, being similar in structure to epinephrine, had some of those same properties. Now, but another thing of more interest to bodybuilders and athletes and people who want to lose body fat, of more interest to them, is the fact that sympathomimetics like ephedrine, because they're similar in structure to, let's say, norepinephrine and epinephrine, and norepinephrine also work at the level of lipocytes or fat cells by promoting a hormonal cascade, beginning with hormone-sensitive lipase. I won't get into it. It has to do with cyclic AMP. It gets a little complicated. I won't get into that. But let's put it this way. When epinephrine and norepinephrine interact with fat cells, they cause fat cells to be released. And hopefully, fat from fat cells to be released. Hopefully, that fat will then circulate in the blood and be oxidized. And the best way to oxidize it is through exercise, especially aerobic exercise. That's another story. But let's put it this way. Anything that works similar to epinephrine and norepinephrine is going to cause the fat cells to release fat. Hence, this is why ephedrine became of interest to people that wanted to lose body fat. Now, what ephedrine actually does on its own is the studies show that it increases a process called thermogenesis. That's a fancy term which translates into fat calories being converted into heat. In other words, it's kind of a metabolic effect where instead of being stored as energy, excess fat calories are converted into heat. It's known in chemistry as a futile cycle, because the calories aren't used to power any movement or work. Instead, they're kind of just burnt up like in a furnace. That's thermogenesis. And it turns out that 75% of the weight loss, this is what the study shows, 75% of the weight loss induced by ephedrine was actually due more to appetite suppression. And this is interesting because almost all the current weight loss drugs that are prescribed by physicians are also kind of like amphetamine-like compounds that also reduce appetite. Now, 25% of the weight loss effect or fat loss effect of ephedrine was due to thermogenesis. As far as the metabolic rate, one study showed that ephedrine, when given to obese patients, it boosted their resting metabolic rate by 8%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but in the course of time, when if these patients are also exercising on a diet, that leads to a substantial loss of fat. In fact, one study showed that a combination of 30 milligrams of ephedrine in one tablet or 325 milligrams of aspirin corrected what they call diet-induced thermogenesis. In other words, when lean people or people without a lot of body fat, when they eat a meal, they get a thermogenic effect, meaning that some of the calories that they ingested during the meal are burnt up as heat rather than stored as fat. And people who have a lot of body fat, this so-called diet-induced thermogenesis is ineffective. It doesn't happen. But when they gave these patients the equivalent of about a tablet of ephedrine and a tablet of aspirin, it completely corrected the deficit they had in diet-induced thermogenesis. In other words, they started burning the calories after a meal just like lean people do, and that's a tremendous effect. Also, another interesting thing about ephedrine is that this thermogenic effect doesn't really last forever. In other words, the longer you took ephedrine, the less of a thermogenic effect your body got. And this is what happens with most drugs and substances. They tend to wear off after a while if you use it consistently. It's called tachyphylaxis is the medical term. And this happens with ephedrine too. However, one effect of ephedrine that kept going, and this is tremendous, you have two main types of thyroid hormone. One of them is called T4. The other one's called T3. T4 is more like a prohormone. It's not very active, but this is the one that's kind of released mainly by the thyroid gland. And then the T4 circulates and is slowly converted into T3. T3 is 5 times more active than T4. Now, where does ephedrine come into this? Ephedrine stimulated the conversion of inactive T4 thyroid hormone into active T3, and this effect stayed. It didn't wear off with time. So in other words, what this means in a practical sense was that using ephedrine and caffeine while you were dieting tended to actually prevent the so-called dreaded dieting plateau that a lot of people experience when they go on a diet of any kind. After a couple of weeks, the body kind of realizes that not enough calories are being consumed, and it kind of adjusts the metabolism downward, so you get a reduced resting metabolism, which slows down the weight loss, and this is often due to changes in the thyroid hormone, whereas where the active T3 hormone is converted into something called reverse T3, which is inactive, and the body does this to protect the catabolism of other tissues such as muscle tissue. Now, theoretically, if you took ephedrine and caffeine while you were dieting, because of this kind of upgraded conversion of T4 into T3, it prevented the dieting plateau. So in other words, you could keep dieting without having this plateau. You would consistently lose body fat. And there's no other supplement or drug on the market other than thyroid itself that was able to do that. And you'll see why this actually caused a problem for ephedrine. But now, one problem with thyroid drugs that a lot of bodybuilders and athletes are familiar with is if you take a lot of thyroid, you not only increase the oxidation of fat, you also tend to stimulate the breakdown or catabolic effects in muscle, especially if you take, let's say, a fairly substantial amount of thyroid. And to get any real thyroid fat-burning effect, you have to take more than the body naturally produces. In other words, if you only take the same amount of thyroid that your body produces, your body just notes that and just stops the thyroid production. So you wind up not really getting any fat oxidation effect. You have to take more thyroid than the body produces. And unfortunately, when you do that, you tend to have side effects, especially effects on the heart, on the nervous system, and on muscle. You tend to get a pretty good amount of muscle catabolism. Interestingly enough, even though ephedrine was shown to increase this conversion of T4 into T3, it did not, this is unbelievable, it did not affect muscle catabolism. It did not break down your muscles. Why? Because one of the ways that ephedrine works is it interacts with what they call beta-adrenic receptors, mainly B1 and B2, and there's another one called B3, which is not thought to be very active in humans. It's more active in rodents. But anyway, to get to the point, the B2 beta receptors tend to have a kind of anabolic effect. They prevent muscle catabolism. In fact, many of you might have heard of the drug clenbuterol. Clenbuterol has a reputation not only as a fat burner substance, but also as a preserver of muscle or even a builder of muscle. And the reason it does that is because clenbuterol interacts with these same beta-2 adrenic receptors. So the reason why ephedrine didn't promote muscle breakdown is because it was able to react or interact, I should say, with beta-2 receptors, which was tremendous effect when you think about it. Ephedrine even had some beneficial effects on cardiovascular function. In obese people that took ephedrine, they showed a 10% elevation of protective high-density lipoprotein cholesterol, along with a lowering of the so-called bad cholesterol LDL. I mean, you couldn't have created a better fat loss drug than ephedrine. Now, what was the original combination of ephedrine found to work best for fat loss? Involved a intake of 25 milligrams of ephedrine, 200 milligrams of caffeine, and 325 milligrams of aspirin, I should say, salicylic acid, acetocyclic acid. Now, what was the reason for the combining of those three substances? I already explained how ephedrine works. The reason they threw in caffeine is caffeine has an independent fat mobilizing effect by inhibiting a chemical called adenosine. And in fact, again, that's why caffeine is the main ingredient in most of the current fat loss or fat burner supplements. And the aspirin and the caffeine, they were thrown in with ephedrine because ephedrine stimulates like I say, it kind of works like epinephrine and norepinephrine, but your body can sense when norepinephrine and epinephrine are in excess, and it tends to activate certain enzymes that break down or degrade epinephrine and norepinephrine. One of these is called phosphodiesterase. There's another chemical involved called cyclic AMP. Prostaglandins are involved. I don't want to get too complex, but let me put it this way. The reason why caffeine and aspirin were added with ephedrine is the caffeine and aspirin extended the effect of ephedrine. They prevented the premature breakdown of these catecholamines that stimulated the fat loss and the fat oxidation. Interestingly enough, when ephedrine was given alone without caffeine, it had almost no fat burning effect, no fat oxidation effect. For best results, it had to be combined with ephedrine, caffeine, and the original studies combined the three, ephedrine, caffeine, and aspirin. Later studies show that the aspirin was not really needed. You got most of the benefits just from taking ephedrine and caffeine, and most of the bodybuilders who used ephedrine in the 90s for fat loss purposes combine ephedrine with caffeine in those dosages, 20 to 25 milligrams per dose of ephedrine, 200 milligrams per dose of caffeine. 200 milligrams is equal to about 2 cups of coffee. Okay, so that's how it worked. Now, unfortunately, ephedrine's effectiveness as a fat loss burner turned out to be its undoing, sadly, because what happened was the ephedrine was removed from the market by the FDA in 2004, and this followed 18,000 adverse effect reports reported to the FDA, included possibly heart attacks and strokes, insomnia, nervousness, extreme nervousness, anxiety, and all this and that. Now, I wondered about this myself because I use the ephedrine caffeine. In fact, I didn't use it so much for fat burning. I used it because ephedrine and caffeine were great stimulants, and they got me through many a workout. Let me tell you, there was many a day when I just was too tired, or I just couldn't work out my interest in going to the gym. I would pop 25 milligrams of ephedrine. I'd take that 200 milligram caffeine tablet, and within an hour, because this combination peaked in the blood in an hour, it lasted for 3 to 6 hours. And it got me into the gym, got me through the workout. So I used it as a kind of poor man's amphetamine, a poor man's stimulant. So I never had any side effects, none, not a single side effect, no nervousness, nothing. It wore off. I even found that there were, later on, I found that there were a couple of antidotes in case I stayed too stimulated after the workout. I found that using an herb called St. John's wort, and another substance found in tea called theanine completely obliterated the stimulation effect induced by ephedrine and caffeine within about a half hour after ingesting either one of those substances. So I actually had an antidote. So it didn't give me insomnia or anything like that. I wrote about these in the magazines that I was writing for at the time because everybody was using ephedrine and caffeine. It should be noted, though, that a later analysis of most of all of these adverse effect reports, which caused the FDA to remove ephedrine from market sales, turns out that almost all of them turned out to be, the only word I could use is bullshit. In other words, what happened was, when the individual cases were examined, it turned out most of them overdosed on ephedrine. Like I said, the safe dosage was 25, maybe 30 milligrams. If you spaced it out during the day, you could use up to 100 milligrams, as long as it was taken in doses of no more than 20, 25 milligrams or 30 milligrams at a time. However, some people, in their zeal to lose body fat quicker, or because they wanted more of a stimulation effect, they would take 100 milligrams at a time or more. And when you took that, you were in a dangerous territory because, again, one of the things that epinephrine and norepinephrine do, and so does ephedrine, it does stimulate the heart, it does raise blood pressure. So when you took a large amount of it, you could cause a problem, especially if you had pre-existing conditions. In other words, if there was something wrong with you to begin with, you already had occult conditions. In other words, if you had something wrong with your heart or high blood pressure or something like that, and you weren't aware of it, if you took a large dose of ephedrine and caffeine, you could get into trouble. But my point is, this didn't happen with the normal doses. It happened with the overdose, or if you had pre-existing conditions. For so-called normal people who didn't fit into either one of those categories, there was no problem. No problem at all. Ephedrine was safe. Now, the one case that more than anything else, which caused ephedrine to be removed from the market, involved a professional baseball player, a pitcher named Steve Beckler. Now, Steve Beckler died while practicing on a field in Florida in February 2003. And initially, all the headlines read that he basically died from using ephedrine. His death initially was said to be caused by ephedrine, but later on, his case was examined. In fact, that's what the original autopsy, the examiner, in his report, he said that the death of Beckler was caused by heat exhaustion related to ephedrine use. However, a later examination by a top New York City toxicologist showed that there was many other factors involved in Beckler's death. For example, he was extremely obese. He had pre-existing cardiovascular disease. He had liver disease. He had high blood pressure. This guy was in really bad shape. Plus, he was overheated. His temperature was thought to be as much as high as 106 degrees that day. So the combination of all those pre-existing factors and the fact that he was out of shape and fat, that's what really causes death. It was never caused by the ephedrine. So the interesting thing about it is the main case which prompted the FDA to remove ephedrine from the market wasn't even caused by ephedrine. It's kind of ironic. Ephedrine is structurally similar to amphetamine, however, but it's 5 to 10 times less potent than amphetamine in causing actions such as high blood pressure and all that. But one of the bad things about one of the reasons that also caused the demise of ephedrine was the fact that a couple of these so-called speed labs discovered that ephedrine could be a good basic starter substance in the production of illicit amphetamine drugs. All they had to do is add another chemical or two, and they can convert ephedrine into amphetamine. So again, this wasn't really good for ephedrine. And there's another factor involved also from a political point of view. A lot of people don't realize that the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, which was formed in the late 1930s, if you look at the original charter of the FDA, you'll find that one of their main purposes is to protect and promote the pharmaceutical industry. Now, it turns out, stop, Chip. It turns out that in direct comparisons between ephedrine and the existing weight loss drugs, ephedrine beat the weight loss drugs out every time. This was considered a threat by the pharmaceutical companies. So the pharmaceutical companies kind of worked in tandem with the FDA to get ephedrine off the market. So a lot of the reason why ephedrine was removed from the market was more for political and financial reasons other than actual side effects. So there was a, you have to consider that. Now think about this. A 2006 study of 61, this 2006, this was 2 years after ephedrine was removed from the market. A study of 61 older obese women found this effect. This I'm reading directly from the study conclusion. A dietary supplement containing a low-potency ephedrine caffeine mixture appeared safe and effective in causing loss of weight and body fat and improving several metabolic parameters, including insulin sensitivity and lipid profiles when tested under physician supervision. Such supplements could be a useful tool to assist with weight loss. A 2015 study found that ephedrine decreased brown fat activity. Now, brown fat is thermogenic, is a type of thermogenic body fat that they previously thought it existed mainly in animals like rodents and in babies, but more recent studies show that it exists in humans. It tends, again, to convert fat calories into heat. Therefore, it would be good for body fat control. For some reason that nobody's able to figure out, ephedrine does decrease brown fat activity. However, the study that showed this provided a dose of, it was men, they gave the men a dose of ephedrine that was the equivalent of 1.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Now, this dose amounted in a 200-pound man to 135 milligrams. Now, 135 milligrams at one time is far more than was ever suggested for fat loss purposes. Again, the dose for fat loss purposes was 20 to 25 milligrams. So, if you took large amounts of ephedrine, way over the safe amount, you could inhibit brown fat reactions, which to me is irrelevant because you'd have to be an idiot to do that because you're going to get in trouble if you use that kind of dosage. Now, a 2008 study in the American Journal of Epidemiology, it looked at 250,364 users of prescribed ephedrine caffeine between the periods of 1995 and 2002, and they concluded that the prescribed ephedrine and caffeine was not associated with a substantially increased risk of adverse cardiovascular outcomes in study, which underscores exactly what I just said, that ephedrine was never a dangerous drug. It was removed from the market because of political and financial reasons, which is very sad because, and I'll say this bluntly, ephedrine and caffeine was a combination that really did promote fat loss. It worked 10 times better than any of the current fat loss or fat burner supplements. Now, can you get ephedrine today? From what I understand, it's being sold on various internet sites. As I've said in past videos, I can't verify how pure or how safe these, let's say, these black market ephedrine suppliers are, or the purity that's being sold on the internet. I can't verify that. I can't even verify whether the ephedrine's real. I do know that ephedrine is banned in most countries, including the United States. However, Malwang, which ephedrine is derived from, is still legal as a tea. In other words, you could consume Malwang tea and get a little bit of ephedrine. It's completely legal. You just can't sell it or in pill form. So that's about it for ephedrine. I wanted to make this video because a lot of people always ask me about fat loss supplements. Do they work? And I just wanted to discuss one that really did work. And by the way, I will be having a in-depth, huge article on brown fat and how to activate it in my Applied Metabolics newsletter, www.appliedmetabolics.com. In that publication, which is 40 to 50 pages every month, I also cover other fat loss techniques. I cover ergogenic aids, anti-aging techniques, hormonal therapy, nutrition, supplements, ergogenic aids. It's all in depth. It's like getting a monthly ebook every month. If you're not subscribing, I'd have to say you're crazy because, excuse me, I'm sorry for saying that, but I honestly believe, I look around at all these other sources and there's nothing that matches what I'm putting together in this Applied Metabolic newsletter. There's nothing on the internet. There's nothing in blogs. There's nothing in magazines. There's nothing in webcasts. There's nothing in podcasts. You'll find the best information in clear, simple English in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. Subscribe today. It's 33 cents a day. It's the LA Times here costs $2 a day, 6 times more money, and you won't get nearly the benefit you'd get from reading my Applied Metabolics newsletter. www.appliedmetabolics.com. If you want to have the best friend you'll ever have in your life, go to your nearest shelter, adopt a dog. They're the best creatures on earth. Save a dog's life. Thank you for listening.